Ave Maria, everyone, and welcome back to the Roman Martyrology podcast. This is Father Ignatius. And the last podcast, we talked about the decree from the year 2001. This time we move on to the decree from 2004. From generation to generation, the mercy of God, the Father Almighty, who spreads the word of the gospel's truth throughout the whole world, grants that the great plan of salvation may reach its fullness in Christ, bestowing upon the faithful the merits of all the saints to venerate, so that the abundance of the Lord's propitiation for mankind, through multiplied intercessors, may be generously given. These wondrous acts of the Most Holy Trinity's love, endlessly worshiping and proclaiming the wonderful and singularly holy God and all the saints, are celebrated by the Church in the veneration of the saints, upon whom the Lord has bestowed various graces on earth and one glorious reward in heaven. A prominent sign of the people of God's devotion toward the saints is the recently revised Roman Martyrology, according to the decree of the Second Vatican Ecumenical Council, the typical edition of which was promulgated on June 29, 2001. Therefore, after a brief interval and attentive use stemming from liturgical renewal, and accepting specific advice from those who have contributed to the study of such an extensive and laborious work, it seemed appropriate to introduce certain amendments to make the text richer and clearer. Quite a few servants of God have been raised by Pope John Paul II to the dignity of the blessed or saints, and have been inserted into this edition, so that they may be honored with appropriate praises on their feast day. Some changes have been made, generally pertaining to saints whose mention had been missing in the previous edition, or had been uncertain for some historical reasons. Furthermore, minor changes refine the Latin language and orthography. Therefore, the Congregation for Divine Worship and the Discipline of the Sacraments, by the special faculties granted to it by Pope John Paul II, now promulgates this second edition of the Roman Martyrology and declares it to be typical. It will be the responsibility of the Episcopal Conferences to translate the text found in this edition into vernacular languages and to send it to this dicastery for approval. Anything to the contrary notwithstanding. From the offices of the Congregation for Divine Worship and the Discipline of the Sacraments, on the 29th day of June in the year 2004, on the solemnity of Saints Peter and Paul, Apostles. This concludes this episode of the Roman Martyrology podcast, and in the next episode we'll be moving on to the Praenotanda, that is the preliminary notes or preliminary remarks of the Roman Martyrology. Thanks for listening. Ave Maria.